My name is Kimi. I'm the director of Bay Rising, one of the groups that Alex helped to start that we just heard about. And we're going to be facilitating, or I am facilitating a panel today around governing power and really talking about the inside-outside strategy that some of our earlier panelists have talked about and what it means to go inside, the organizing, kind of the strategy behind that, and really talk with these amazing panelists about what their experience is and kind of what do we need in this moment. So the goal of this session, though, is to talk about inside-outside strategies. What does it mean to connect with elections and electoral work, organizing work? Where is it connected? Where is it not? And really to give an assessment of that and then hopefully get some ideas about how we can move forward together. So, is that the right session that all of you are here for? All right, I made it. So, as folks were coming in, I was asking, what questions are you coming into the room with? We had some very specific ones around working with elected. So, I'll just say this here, then if there's others, so that the panelists can think about it as they do their presentations. But one question was, well, once the person's elected, what is their movement relationship and what does accountability look like? Another one is about what are the electeds' relationship to other departments and agencies, right? So when you talk about governing power, what are those relationships? And then where is the alignment? Once someone's been elected, right, how do you build alignment and how do you actually maintain that alignment? And that's something we've also seen where we elect somebody and then they go off and do their own thing. Right? Are there other questions that you'd like to hear the panel address?
Hello. I live in your district and I see you. And I think the question is like, one of the things that I'm experiencing in alignment is right, like your constituency base is so, well, it's for the board. Okay, yeah, it doesn't answer. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry about that. Okay. I think my question is just like knowing, right, like, as an elect, like your district is so big, right? And there's so many different constituencies. Like I think one thing we're going up against right now is just around policing. And I find it like super hard, like talking to neighbors, right? And so there's something I think in the county, but also in that like mass line, when a district could have like different mass lines, and how does like the elected power like navigate that, or how do we build, like transforming like our neighbors, because again they're oftentimes responding to like material conditions, and then choosing reaction as well. So there's something about, I think also like in a district there are lots of different perspectives, and so how do we build power? But then they're also right, if they're really like conservative, like they're going to be cool with these conservative policies, and how do we? There's I think that also like the people and the multiple conflicting experiences and desires and the reactions to violence that are sometimes again encouraging more state violence. Very big question. Sorry, yes.
That's okay. We'll take one more. Israel?
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We live in a time of multiple crises, and there are many needs. So I wonder how you prioritize the many communities coming from your constituents in particular, at moment by moment.
Great. All right. Those are lots of big questions. Okay. So what we wanted to do now was just have the panel introduce themselves a little bit. You could read their bios online. They're all amazing folks again. But in terms of just having them share a little bit about when did they realize having an inside-outside strategy was important? Because I think, so just for myself, I've been organizing for 30 years, and I'll say the first 20 years, I was like, I don't think we really need to do that electoral stuff. Other people are doing that. I am base building with undocumented workers out on the street. That's where I need to be. And it wasn't until we passed all these great laws, and then it didn't really matter because nobody was implementing them. Oh. And it was like, oh shit, we have minimum wage, we have overtime, we have all these things for workers. but they don't mean anything if there's no one implementing them. And then we're like, oh god, now we gotta actually think about who we're gonna elect. How are we gonna hold them accountable and work with them? Because we have a lot of great things on paper, but it's not real. Right? So that was one of my moments. I'll pass it to Lee. So Lee is the title, executive director of Brazilian Strategies, which is an LLC, strategically an LLC, which will explain why, and has been part of movement. Was deputy director at CPA, Chinese Progressive Association, has held numerous positions, helping to build capacity. And then we have Shaketa, who is the current director of Causa, Just Cause, came from Buffalo, New York, to join us in California, has been organizing now for 3 years now. So she's going to share about Causa and their organizing. And then we have Nikki Bass, who is our current Oakland City Council president. I worked with 20 years ago, fighting for government workers, so we worked together a long time ago. And so Nikki was an organizer with eBay, or director of eBay's, the East Bay Alliance for Sustainable Economy, worked with Partnership for Working Families, part of Sweatshop Watch, number of organizations, and she's the reluctant elected where we forced her to run. She is not kind of was like, I gotta run, I'm gonna do this. We made her run because we knew we needed someone inside. So she'll talk about that story. So I want each of them to go through. So when was it that they felt like it was important to have an inside-outside strategy? So.
Thanks, Kim. So again, my name is Lee, and I think part of the reason why I asked to be part of this particular panel was the work that me and a few organizers did in 2019-2020 to build out a project called Seek the Vote. So Seek the Vote was a vehicle that we used to organize kind of a left base to engage in defeating Trump in the 2020 election. After Trump won in 2016, I think a lot of us were, caught off guard and really didn't know exactly what to do. And so we started kind of engaging and talking with each other about the needs for the left to organize a united front. And I think that work, which the previous panel talked about, the importance of basically building with folks who are not necessarily completely politically aligned with you to win governing power is a key part of the strategy that we need to employ to be able to actually win for our communities. And it's something that I think I came from kind of anti-establishment organizing against the system. And so I don't know if there was a one moment where I was like, oh shit, like this is not enough. I think there were many moments along that process where I realized that what we were doing was thinking too small about the control and power that we could wield in our communities, in the state, in the country. And I think one of the things that's really critical about how
I am from Buffalo, New York. And I think one thing, a big thing to know about me is that my dad was like really big into getting folks into office. He's like his own chairman in our neighborhood. Like, we'll always be working the polls. We're always right, just making sure that folks in our neighborhood were involved in the electoral process. And so, I saw a lot of that every year, all the time, like constantly. And, and I think that is important to him, right? Because the generation before him could not vote, could not be engaged and involved in the electoral process. And so for me, actually, for a big part of my life, right, it felt like that's just how it's supposed to be. We engage in the electoral process, and it works out the way it works out. And then it wasn't until actually I really got into like organizing, really thinking about power, really thinking about strategy, trying to determine actually how we shift things and how we change the power that people are wielding, that I actually was like, oh, like there's something else. And a big part of that was, well, one thing too is like in Buffalo there's the machine I didn't mention is called grassroots, and it is like an electoral machine. Like these people are like out there. They have president, they have districts, they have like all these own terms. They're like out there. They are like getting so many people elected all of the time. And then once folks are in office, right, they immediately return in the community. The same folks, even who are out there, right? Like how many things they elected. And so it wasn't until, like I said, I started organizing using my power that I was like, this could potentially change. And it was specifically when Chokwe and entire Lula was running in Jackson that I was like, oh, like this dude is like, right, he's one of us. He comes from, he identifies as socialist. He is part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement, right? And I was like, wow, like maybe this is something that would be different. And so I was the director of an organization in Buffalo then. So we sent like a crew of folks down to Jackson to like make sure it actually happened, to make sure, we were just a small part of like the larger strategy and getting with it. But I think that was like the time where I really like actually felt some hope that like if we got one of our folks in there, like what does that mean to shift power, right? And in Jackson, they've had like, Chokwe's dad was the mayor, and they've just had like 30 years of just like organizing and like trying to shift material conditions for the folks on the ground. So I was like, yo, this is like fertile ground. So let's see what can actually happen if we get someone in. And so I think that was really like the moment where I was like, oh, okay, maybe we can actually do some stuff. And it obviously felt bigger than what was happening in Buffalo, because it's like the work that I do is a part, obviously, of a larger movement. So what is that?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to see all of you and to know that I represent some of you as well. So as Kimi said, I am the reluctant elected official. In fact, there's a new Panay anthology that has an essay I wrote about that. So maybe we'll share that with the organizers. You all can read it. So I actually come to this work from an immigrant experience. Both of my parents immigrated from the Philippines, and despite speaking English at the hospital where they worked, where my dad worked, he was discriminated against, and he actually blew the whistle on the wrongdoing, about the wrongdoing of the hospital and the patient's death, and just kind of fought that through a lawsuit eventually that he won. And this was also in Northern Virginia in the South, in a very segregated, mostly Black and white community, which is a handful of APIs. And so what sort of stoked the fire in my belly around social justice was my family's experience as immigrants. was also the anti-Blackness that I saw in our community as well as in my family. And I picked up and left that area and came to the Bay Area 2 weeks after I finished school and got connected with garment worker organizing, which is where I met Kimi, also where I met Lee, and Eric Moore back there, who's also a former board member at San Francisco. And so I'm saying all of this because my work is really mostly as an organizer and advocate. And there's probably 2 moments that I'll share where I thought more about inside-outside strategy and co-governance. One was in 2012, where I was leading eBase at the time, and we were working with a coalition on the massive redevelopment of the Oakland Army base. And we were trying to push with a community labor coalition for good jobs, the good jobs agreement with living wage, local hire, ban the bots. And we were actually able to win that agreement. And I would say that the pivot that was really important was that we had an assistant city administrator at the time, Fred Blackwell, who understood, well, first he shared our values and he understood how to navigate inside City Hall and kind of work with us to create a process whereby we can hit our goals. And so that kind of gave me an inkling of, okay, if you have allies in government, what can you do? And then the second thing is, a couple of years later in 2014, I was working with a coalition called Lift Up Oakland that was working with fast food workers to raise the minimum wage. And so that needed to be done by ballot. And we went to the city council, who has the authority to put measures on the ballot, and we lobbied them to put this measure on the ballot so the voters could decide, and they wouldn't do it. Rob Bonta at the time even facilitated a mediation to try to get the electeds to work with us and put it on the ballot so the voters could decide. And so, actually, I might just share one more story. And then the thing that actually sparked our Oakland community to recruit someone to run for this District 2 seat that I now have is that the person who preceded me was our progressive candidate. And there is a parcel of public land in Oakland that's very contested that he voted to develop for mostly market rate housing. And that really upset me, it upset the community, and so that was one of the big things that actually galvanized the Oakland progressive community to find someone to challenge him. And long story short, I got recruited to run, and I'm really proud that I did back that development project, and that parcel of land is going to have 2 100% affordable housing.
Just to warm up. And I think what we want to dig into, though, is this moment of governance, right? So just another kind of background on this. If any of you lived in California in the 90s, we had a Republican governor. So who remembers Pete Wilson? He did Prop 187, 209. He did all these attacks on people of color. And at that time, all of us were like, oh, elections, what's going on? And that was kind of the spark for many of us that we were like, okay, we do need to pay attention to what's happening upstairs and to these like elected officials. And so now, 30 years later, we have our own folks in office, right? And I think that what Nikki's talking about, we ran some people, the one before her as an example, who then just became another corporate Democrat. So actually now what we're facing is a lot of people saying, oh yeah, I'm a Democrat. And they're not, like they don't have aligned values with us. And so saying Democrat here in the Bay, there's like 7 colors of blue, right? Like you can say you're progressive, but probably 80% of the stuff they're saying is not aligned with our social justice values. And so now we're in this new moment of like, okay, we need to redefine what that means. But because we're a 2-party state, this is what's difficult, right? And so talking now, I think I want to shift this and start talking about our organizing in this kind of moment of having Democrats that actually aren't really representing us, right? Even though they say they are. And then what do we need to do to kind of like really connect our movements to this larger political moment? So an example just kind of being when Obama was elected, he had a huge volunteer base, all kinds of people coming out, excited elections. But after that, the offices just shut down. And people were like, oh, can I have vacuum? Can I have this and that? And they just kind of like dispersed. And I was like, but wait, you were just doing all this organizing. What just happened? And so we needed to figure out, well, how can we interact differently with elections? Because we don't just want to excite people for that 1 month and be like, okay, vote on all these things, and then we just never talk to them. So I think this is where we're trying to think about how does our on-the-ground, long-term organizing connect with the electoral, but we're not just helicoptering in, we're not just like stopping by for a second, we're thinking about long-term. So that's my question. My next question is for you. So we've built out Seed the Vote, and there's an intention around working with grassroots organizations. So can we talk a bit more about how it's not just about throwing people into an election and then walk away?
Yeah, totally. So I think a few reflections here. I think one is that the election, getting someone in office is important, but it's often a step in a much bigger part of what needs to happen. I think at the grassroots and community level, we need, of course, to continue to organize our folks, to stay engaged, to put pressure on whoever it is, that whether lost or won, we have to continue to exert pressure to make sure that the policy that we want actually. And I think it's important, I think, to recognize that once we help elect someone in the office, they're actually in the system that is set up against us. Lobbyists, people who can kind of go to the office all the time, be present all the time, have their ear all the time, are there. We often just kind of fade into that. And that's a problem. We're not providing the support and the pressure to the electeds that is needed to actually continue the work that we're building. And so, part of our strategy is to work with organizations that are going to do that on cycles. And so we're, in some ways, we are helicoptering in more support to win the election, but we're doing it with groups and organizations that are in those communities invested long term to basically continue that. Because if you just kind of pop it out, the entire infrastructure is set up against us. And so we just have to keep that in mind. And we have to keep in mind, because of that infrastructure, what are the things that we have to continue to do and be real about what's possible? Because if we kind of like leave electeds kind of out there on their own, without support, this has happened in our experience, in my experience working in San Francisco, and they become effective, they either lean towards the other direction, or they're also kind of like disempowered to be able to actually continue to move forward. And so we have to think about the entire kind of like ecosystem around supporting and pushing electeds as well. And so I think that a kind of key part of that is continuing to invest in the organizations that are going to keep that work up.
Can I have Nikki respond to this? So how did you feel when you got in? Like, what could the community have done better, or what did you do well to continue to work with you? So that you felt like you got supported, did you not feel supported? How did you feel?
I think it was a mixed bag, and I think Mayor Chantal is probably feeling some of what I experienced. So there was so much focus on just winning the seat, which we did. I mean, I did under by 14 points. The first people incumbent in 30 years. But then I was like, oh no, my staff. And it took me a long time to set up. So there's not only a pipeline into elected office, there's a pipeline into boards and commissions, there's a pipeline into staff positions for electeds and for those department heads in the administration. So I had to figure out how to staff up. I had to figure out how to work inside and how to build relationships with those department heads that had to implement the policies that were already on the books, or the ones that I was gonna pass. And, like honestly, and I think this is, pretty visible, it's for Mayor Chantal, and this often happens when there's a transition in an administration. um, people leave, and so we're in a moment to Oakland where we need a police chief, a violence prevention chief, a homelessness administrator, a housing and community development director, a human services director, a parks and rec director. There might even be more positions, but that's also an opportunity. And are we also ready to get folks we know and love, maybe the professors here at Cal or other places, to go into those leadership positions, because that's also where we can that ecosystem of governance that we mentioning and leverage more of that power that we're contesting for.
Okay, and well, so then I wanted to ask you more about how to do strengthen your organizing strategy and how you see it connected.
Yeah, so, the first 2 weeks that I was here, right, I heard the definition of them. Like, I was like, this could be really different or really, like, just hearing the word political without the definition. So this could be really, it's in there, like power, people get really like funny with power, right? And like I said, back home, it is not. And so the definition, I just wanted to do the definition that, uh, is that it's a model of governance in which public officials and movement organizations who are ideologically aligned advance a shared analysis, vision, and agenda for structural change for economic, political, racial, organized others. Great to what we are talking about. And the thing about what Cedar and Cedar and how we believe shifting material conditions, how we believe in engaging, is that one, we have a serve the people model, right? And so part of that is that we are able to help and aid in the shifting of material conditions for folks with our hotlines that we have around making sure that people are staying housed. And then through there, our folks are shifted into the organizing side of our work, right? And we're constantly trying to build our goals, engage our folks to actually engage in the process. And then a large part of that is that Kimi talked about these groups, like these rising groups, that we have in Oakland, San Francisco, and in the larger Bay Area, like which our folks can get plugged into. And so they are an electoral sort of arm outfit engagement front that basically is like working towards making sure we are getting like ballot initiatives on the ballot, that we're getting candidates in. And so I think it's important for us to be making sure that we're engaging in that process, right? Because the larger vision that we talk about is that we have these 3 C's: community rights, community control, and community ownership, right? And so the goal isn't just to get like great people like Nikki in, which we love, right? I absolutely love this, but right, it's about what comes after that and what we're actually working towards, right? And that doesn't just mean like having our people in it, like how are we actually shifting, how are we like busting things up, what is the actual like type of power and like governing structure that we want to have after this. And so I think shifting those, we just continue to be pushing our folks around that, getting folks in so that we can start to shift and push the agenda that we want to get to the future we're trying to build is really important for us to continue to think about.
Well, and just a little more background. So Causa Justa is a member of San Francisco Rising and Oakland Rising.
Yeah.
And then there's Silicon Valley Rising, and there's Liquid Contra Costa. And Bay Rising that I staff is like the umbrella for these different counties to come together. But just to say the risings came up 15 years ago because they saw that the community groups didn't have enough power. Because the community groups coming to the table with the union or the Democrats or whoever, like other political bodies, they were like, oh, you're just like, domestic workers that work in the mission. Like, we don't really need you. But when the risings came together, then it was Chinese workers from Chinatown, Filipino workers in Soma. It was, Coleman advocates with folks from Hunters Point, Bayview. So you had all these different community groups coming together saying, no, actually, we're aligned. And you can't fuck with us if we're all together, right? And so the idea of the risings was a community coalition to engage in election work, to do electoral politics. And then Bay Rising then is like to say, okay, all 5 counties, we're trying to do something here and really build a statewide power. And now we've brought Working Families Party here because what I was saying about the Democrats not really living up to what we thought they would be. And so Working Families Party is a way then with a political structure to pull folks to the left and actually have more definition. So I think we're all trying to like deal with this in different ways. So I'm wondering if we want to go back and talk a little bit more. There's some questions on the board that were more for Nikki around like once you're elected, what happens and some of those dynamics. Do you want to go there or do people want to respond to anything else? We can go there. So in terms of holding electeds accountable, so I think this is the tension that we had with what Nikki was saying. The previous person we had in office, he like didn't show up for key votes, he voted the wrong way, he stopped taking meetings with people, so then he became unresponsive. And then our folks were like, well, we're gonna run someone against you then, right? And so this idea of like, that's one way to keep someone accountable is to run someone else. But I think we wouldn't want it to get to that point, right? And so have you built a relationship with the elected before and keep it going? So in other examples, we've tried, as we develop someone as a leader and say, okay, we want you to run for office, okay, we're gonna meet with you and be part of your like kitchen cabinet, meet with you every month. But then there's that point once they get into office, do they keep meeting with you or not? And so if you built up the relationship before, sure, it happens, right? But then there's those moments that once they get in, they stop calling you back. And then, so what do you do? So I don't know if any of you want to talk more about that. Like, so folks that you've gotten into office, and then with CPA, you've got relationships with other supervisors.
Yeah, so CPA Action Fund, CPA Fund, I've worked with them. And I feel like actually, to be real, again, the holding accountable part, I feel like requires us to be working with folks. That's actually the first thing. I think it's kind of how much of into kind of steering and working with elections to get work. Because I think we kind of like leave the picture and say like, in a year or two, they're not like paying attention to what we want anymore. We kind of didn't hold ourselves accountable for the work that we have. And so I'm just going to put that out there and say that like election, yes, and then we have to figure out how we can improve. Otherwise, in some ways, we're just like, we're not being effective. And so I think the ways that we have thought about doing that is like supporting kind of moving staff into positions in those offices. And so different points of time, Eric, who's back there, used to represent in San Francisco, and Eric had staff that came from CPA on the staff. I think that's true for other offices as well. That's one way to engage with the policy that happen. I think it's working with folks to like actually put out specific policies, whether it's like a minimum wage enforcement or procurement kind of things in terms of targeting things like that. Like specific policies are actually what the tangible things that happen. And so, yeah, I think that there's like different things that we can begin that process of co-governance. And we have to be realistic and work with the electors and understand actually the different forces that they're contending with. Because sometimes we create the space that's necessary for them to move, because it doesn't happen automatically. Sometimes we have to like create the commotion outside for them to get to move something inside. And so this kind of inside-outside strategy, it's hard work. You know, sometimes it's kind of like stomaching working with folks that you don't necessarily want to work with all the time. Right? Like, it's needing to show up time and time again. And sometimes like politics that are not as clean, sometimes kind of like a little bit. And I think that's often what people experience. Oh, like I just have to like do this thing, but you have to kind of keep the bigger goal in mind. You're doing this not because like you necessarily want to do this, but because our communities need this to be done to be able to achieve. And I think keeping our eyes on ties is a critical part of the maturity that we need to develop.
So I think too, like when we talk about, when I talk about organizing, there's a lot of aspects around when we're building a base and political homes that we say that like, right, part of us is that we're connected to each other. Like, right, I can't do it without you, you can't do it without you, like, you can't shift this without each other. And so I think about it in that way, right? Like if Nikki's in there, she doesn't feel supported, protected. We don't have enough power on the outside to be able to make sure that she's good, right? Like who wants to go into somewhere into battle without having folks that are behind? And so to me, like, right, like you were saying, it's both sides of accountability. Like if we're not doing our part, they can't do their part, right? And so I think remembering that and like bringing for good reason and being able to have a relationship with like actually this is what's happening and how do you need us to show up and this is how we need you to show up. And I think that is also very important to the accountability.
Or just project a little bit. Yeah. Thank you both. That, I think what you both said is spot on. You know, when I ran for office, my top priority, which is still my top priority, was housing insecurity. So if you think about the 8 years that Mayor Schaaf's administration was running Oakland, when you look visibly or if you look at the data and you see how homelessness was growing, it's sickening. And so before I entered office, I was working on housing issues. And as I entered office, I was working to put together an agenda with the community. And Causa just Cause was part of that. ACE, the Alliance for California's Community Empowerment, was part of that. The Oakland was part of that. And Shaketa mentioned the 3 C's, right? Community rights, community control, and community ownership. And so one of the things that we were talking about before I entered office is like, how do we create a new start for housing? Well, one of that could potentially be, how do we get more housing off the rental market into community ownership, right? And so when I entered office, I worked with ACE in the community land trust in Oakland in particular to figure out how can we create a program and a pool of funding that would allow tenants who are housing insecure to purchase their homes with their trusts. And so we had a whole, campaign around this. And there were different parts of it. Before I became an elected that we basically talked about comprehensive campaigns where to win your goal, you need an organizing strategy. You need a research strategy, you need a policy advocacy strategy, you need communication, you need legal, and if you need to win through government, you need a strategy for the elections. And so with ACE and the community land trust, we feel quite happy to be we worked on this campaign to win what we call the Permanent Affordability Fund. And my first 6 months in office, we actually won $14 million and created a program and have helped dozens of families purchase their homes with land trusts. Fast forward, last fall, I put onto the ballot Measure U, and that's about $350 million for affordable housing, a portion of which will go towards that program. So that's probably one of the best examples of we treated it as like, okay, I'm just over here now. But this is part of the campaign that we're working on together. And, you know, when I worked on the eviction moratorium, now as I'm working to phase that out, we also need really strong outside strategies because people need to, you all need to make your voices heard so that anyone who may not share our values, who might be on the fence because they've got, constituents in their district who don't like these policies, that you all need to make a lot of noise and help advocate so that those of us who need it inside City Hall have that backing also.
All right, I'm wondering if questions are coming up from the audience. You did all this? Okay, let's my name is Justa, and my question is primarily for the past. My question was, how has your ideology changed since being in office, and any ideas or beliefs that you held before having power that you had to change or change strategy around since being in power? Are there other questions about this?
You all have like tactics in a lot of ways well, but I'm just curious, and I'm building on a lot of those heard throughout the day. Are there practical skills that you're seeing lacking in like the outside tech? Like that could be deemed for better, to be stronger co-governing partners or just actually like not always be the resistance, but also
My name is Kimi. So I have a question around people power that I've been hearing that theme, right? So I'm an intercultural communications professor, and I'm more interested in, not more, but I'm very interested in building multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions. I think the biggest issue is that we talk about people power and unifying, but we never really get to how we manage the difference, engage it, and how we respond to the intercultural and particular dynamics that create conflict. And I'm really curious if you can just talk about, in your professional career, how have you responded to the intercultural differences that exist and manage those diversities that interferes with the coalition that we're trying to build?
Okay, that's a lot. Okay, a lot of stuff. Yeah. Okay. First question to Nikki on the agenda.
I think we don't need the double mic. People project.
Yeah, I kind of want to speak to all three if I can. Mia, that's you behind that mask, right? Yeah. I just wanted to make sure. I think this also speaks, I'll try to speak to your question as well. I think community safety really can help answer some of these questions. So, we'll start. around community safety, and certainly after George Floyd was murdered, there was the national uprisings. That really kind of was a moment for electeds to lead. And that was in my first 2 years in office when we didn't have a city council. That was really the most upfront in terms of, hey, we have to take this moment and we direct funding from the police and the violence. I would say where I could use more support from the movement is around implementation. It's like we've got great ideas, great vision. Great ideas, great vision. We know where we want to go, but how we get from where we are now to that vision of a 50% reduction in our police budget, for example. We can't do that in 2 years, not even in 4 years. But I do think that I have really shifted in the 21 budget that I led how we get there, because we have been able to shift in Oakland so that there's more investment in violence prevention, a lot more investment. There's also now crisis responders in the fire department. There are traffic enforcement officers or traffic enforcement civilians in our transportation department. All of that has been put in motion. But I think what I don't have enough allies who share my vision and values and your vision and values who can help think through what is this probably 10-year plan or longer. It's not just a 2 or 4 year plan, it's a longer term plan in terms of how we get to a society where we don't need our communities police. Right? We want our communities, and we know that starts with jobs and housing, education, and healthcare, but we can't do it alone at the city, and so we have to be working on all fronts with the county, the state, and feds, because what we're addressing is a dramatic redistribution of wealth. Right? And so I can't solve that as a Oakland council member. We can't even solve that in the city of Oakland. And so to your question, I ran as a socialist this time around. I believe that we should have a country where we don't have to rely on policing, where everyone's basic needs are met. But what I know being inside for 4+ years is that it's going to take so much at every single level of government and a massive, massive movement. Like, I still think even though I'm in this position, organizing is the number one thing that we have. Yeah. Organizing year round, every day. And to Mia's point, because she knows how diverse the opinions are in our district, I have to meet people where they're at. And so I have, because of like rising anti-Asian hate and little Saigon and Chinatown, I have met people where they're at. The police, they need Cantonese and officers, you need to be walking. You need to actually be responding and solving crimes. And I'm still advocating for all of the other things that will move towards our vision, and that the police is that might be hard for some people, but there's no magic wand. Like, we're not going to get there unless we're all working together and building things.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is, of course, fundamentally we need to be able to more people in this. It's not that it's actually about being able to connect with to where we can go. Other thing as leftists, though, we need discipline and purpose. This work is going to be, and some of this stuff is very incremental, and we have to be able to do it. Otherwise, we're going to setting ourselves up for failure, setting other people. If they think that like a year or 2 years is college, That's an unrealistic expectation. We're setting things up in a way that's going to come back and bite us. And so we have to be really intentional about how we kind of present radical ideas to folks and understand that that's what we get to, but it's not like, no magic wand, and it's going to take hard work. And hard work, I feel like, is something that we just need to do. And I'm including myself in that, because I think, especially sometimes in the big picture, it's easy to take for granted some of the bubbles of like politics.
Yeah, so at CNBC, we have, a Black and brown framework. I do believe that we have to have and when it comes to, I mean, it's hard, right? I don't want to sound too, it is difficult, people who say, but I think the biggest thing that we laid out a position. We can't get integrated without being interconnected to one another. We make that very clear about the struggle of both folks. We make sure that we are bringing our folks together, that we are able together, strategizing together, doing political education together, movements of thought that food with their lives, right? So we make sure that the things that we do are actually together, that we strategize together, because we are collective. And as much as I say that I fight for Black liberation, I feel like we fight it free, we all get free, right? So that means that I can't live there and all of my people are coming with me. So I think being able to articulate that and being in that front, and like you said, being rigorous, right? Making sure, I mean, it is hard work, and it's gonna take a long time. I'm not saying that like all of our days and meetings are like rainbows and sunshine, because they're not. Sometimes we actually really have to deal with big issues and things that are coming up in the room. And yeah, it's hard work, but making sure that we know where we're going and continue to try to point folks for the next stop, and then be developing and shifting in that process, I think is key to even like getting to those things.
I just want to add that for me, when we were doing immigrant organizing, we had people that were speaking 5 or 6 different languages.
Right.
And so language is a huge first step. And so can you do things that don't need language? So we did actual physical activities with the workers. It was get up and go, and actually look at each other in the eye, talk to each other, share stories, but have all the translation and all that kind of stuff to break barriers. And one of the things we did was even talking about our immigration story, how did we get to the US? Because all of us, except unless you're with us, got here somehow. But by doing that landscape with all the workers, they saw, oh, you came here in 1800s, or you came here in the 1900s, I came here then. Finding those common grounds amongst that broke the barriers through language. And then to hear their oppression and struggle. Because all of us have had some form of oppression or struggle as we immigrated here. And so sharing those stories, people became people, right? It wasn't just oh, those workers over there, they don't like it, whatever. Right. They actually, it's oh wait, they're a mother, or they got deported, or they have this health issue. So as much as we could try to have these personal connections with people, I think that's it's long, hard work. Right? You can't just expect all these workers or all these people to come together 6 languages and understand each other.
Yes, I just want to comment, so. And I think some of the most kind of critical, multiracial work that we do Chinese community is a tension in different neighborhoods because of the changing demographics and kind of like, there's an increasing need, increasing and so there are moments that spark, there are moments of like interpersonal violence that we can kind of like, and I think those are some of the kind of most kind of like salient kind of like places where there's opportunity both for kind of like what we actually like, kind of taking up the issue and there's also kind of an incredible need for us to step in and provide a different kind of analysis and perspective of what's going on. And so I think that like I think for us we have to kind of we thought about adjusting the issue on multiple levels. One is that we have to be work together. We have to kind of be able to build a relationship on and achieve kind of policy goals with other people. Kind of get into some of that interest. But there's also the real work of actually bringing people together who have different experiences and kind of unpacking those experiences. Why Chinese element actually defeat why we can't just ignore that fact when we're talking like these big political ideas of that being solidarity. They have real experiences that cause that fear. So how do we unpack that? How do we work with between communities to be able to see that where that's coming from and how we address that together? So I think there's all this work that's actually like really intense because like when you think about people's experience, like especially the immigrants from China who just come over in 6 years, their entire experience of like race is not exactly a progressive one coming from China. And then what they experience, so there's all this kind of history and tracking and just being real about like where people are at and like what the work is and so that we won't kind of shortcut and get lost over that setting. I think we would be part of this to see women and to just bring people together and build that relationship and kind of, not just kind of like rushes.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes, so let's do the stack again when we pass the mic and get the questions and we'll see if we can answer them.
This question is mostly in response to needless to say that I'm interested in, I'm sure everybody would be interested in hearing what any of you have to say about it. It's like getting really specific. I'm from San Francisco. I was at a board of supervisors.
I think the mic might be
Oh, it
on.
is on.
Oh,
It's
it's
on.
on.
It's
Oh,
just
okay.
not great quality.
Okay.
Okay.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was at a board of supervisors meeting when there were Chinese elders with interpreters who showed up talking about their fear, their real fear. And the supervisors were sympathetic, but had no solution. They couldn't come up with anything. Granted, in the moment, this was several years ago and it's still kind of a new issue, but I just thought sitting there, I was there for some completely other reasons. I was thinking, this is a moment that could be taken advantage of, but I didn't have any ideas like what could have been done in the moment at that point that you guys can envision.
Well, I think this is a reoccurring thing on the Chinese part, right? Actually taking advantage of it. We're going to keep stacking it.
Let's get something in place. Immigrants who come to this country, they live a life So this is the perspective. Because under the thing that we are going to have, I'm from the well, this is the some of the process to so it's about a recurring the community. So as part of the largely understood that people came in the last 2 decades, especially from certain people, with the larger money jobs and political jobs, the economic needs not even that, they don't know the history of this nation, about the social perspective. All of this started to suffer for the 4 centuries, and why are we doing and we are promoting the using the African Americans as a tool to fight against things. And that my fellow African Americans say no to this proposition, and especially the Indian community senator community, and that community, largely put a big ban, don't say no to the proposition. Because when we need to speak about this, raising the tax, we have to know that. That's not how it works. So how are we going to organize in this opposition? If there's all these communities that in terms of fraud and political money and everything, how are we going to organize it? They can hire.
My question is more about like the question we made earlier about like, we're kind of in a bubble here. In the area, and I live in small farm, so that's the state of California. I worry about we're leaving them behind, particularly from the color that like we're not in progressive districts, but like being us. And like what is the strategy that you all think of in terms of like thinking outside of the Bay Area and thinking about supporting the communities? That's big.
That's socialism. We see the crisis of capitalism churning out more and more people through things like medical debt and unemployment and inflation. So, how do you see these strategies like for shifting money away from policing or housing being up against this juggernaut of late capitalist exploitation and disaster?
All big questions.
Yeah.
Chinese dollars and safety, we have affirmative action, we have the bubble of the day, and then we have debt. So, these last round, this is the speed round. Who wants to jump into any of those?
I think I'll just take a small bite. So I think with immigrant communities in particular, it's kind of on us. It's on us collectively to figure out how to provide context and education into what the politics of this country are. Because I think without that, the right wing amplification and social media right now, like I feel like we're overrun like 99.1 kind of business. And so like we do have to create some vehicles to get push back against that. And that's like communications, that's like the one-on-one organizing. There's a lot that needs to happen. I'm a very small student. We kind of think about how we kind of get folks kind of like reoriented into campus. If we have these like disorientation guides, like when someone shows up, like, this is what we need to know about this institution, and like kind of a rapid kind of education. I feel like those are some of the things that we need out there, like video, like all types of things that we need to be able to engage or to actually understand politics. The country that we're moving into, because that narrative is not one that we're actually controlling. Yeah, anyway, so that's small, and that doesn't really address like, I think it's a massive effort, but one that needs to happen, otherwise we're going
I mean, the things that like were brought up are, obviously with the exception of it, are larger in space. And yeah, I mean, I think all of us can probably say that we're like united. We're thinking about. I think one of the most difficult things is to me is like coming into organizing and and so point right when the world, this country is against us, right, erasing our history, my history, then there will continue to be chaos, disorganization around how we're moving forward, right? Because there's no roots. And then on the opposite side of that, right, because of populism and white supremacy, right, we have the rise of individualism, right, where I would say younger folks of color, younger Black folks, right, are sort of in this age of like woke respectability and aren't actually like rooted in a way of pride in our history, right? So you have these two sort of things that are working against us. And we know organizing gets us to the win, but, right, how do we get to scale? How do we fade out? And I also think, how do we go deeper? And so I guess I only have more questions. But
Yeah, I'll try to try to sort of touch on the wealth question. I think to complement the organizing of popular education and also, really working on shifting the narrative, because so much of what we're up against is like a battle of ideas with the right. All of that is incredibly important, and also figuring out for each level of decision making, what can we do to move them? So, one of the things that I wanted to work on in the office is creating a more progressive business tax. We're one of very few cities that did not have until recently a progressive tax, meaning that a mom and pop grocery store pays the same flat tax rate as Whole Foods or So I have been working on this for some time. In 2020, when I tried to put it on the ballot, I was one vote short of getting it on the ballot. In 2022, I worked on it again. We got it on the ballot and voters approved it. And so that is making our economic system and our revenue system more progressive and equitable. So we're going to be able to raise $20 million in additional annual revenue in a time where we're also facing a budget deficit. And that's starting to shift things. With each budget cycle, while I've been in office, we've been able to shift millions of dollars from policing to violence prevention or to other ways to do, to address the response that we need. And that's what we're doing in Oakland, and I think we have to so that we can do that with every level of Alex Lee, who's a progressive state legislator, is working on a wealth tax, which I think is really important. So there's ways to get there. And
We just have a few more minutes and we're gonna do your last round, but
A lot of these issues, as like we can't just focus at the local level. That's kind of one of the things. It's true, especially in other places. And so I think that's another piece of the work that we have to do, is thinking about how us as rooted organizers individually take responsibility in these basic questions at the state level and the national level, because decisions that are made there impact our local budgets. And so I think that that's a point that I think when I was doing organizing earlier in my time, I didn't really make that connection as much. And I think it's important because like so much of the resources actually don't come forward.
I think we only have a couple minutes left. I was gonna do a summary then. But basically, I wanted to go back to some of the questions around just holding electeds accountable and the relationships and all this. And I think the general theme is like we need to work together earlier, right? Like don't just wait till someone's in office or wait till they do something wrong and then start yelling at them. Like we need to build a relationship earlier. We have to help set the agenda, right? Because then they get into office, it doesn't mean that now they're an expert in budgets and police and everything else. Like they still need us to help figure that out, right? And define what the agenda is and work together. It's not just them as an elected, it's all the other staffers that are in City Hall. So it's like the other departments and all the other like pieces of the puzzle that make things happen. So we need our folks to go in there as well. This idea of what else? Alignment, I think we got most of that. So I think the other thing I wanted to say, as going back to the panelists earlier today, the multi-pronged approach, right? You can't just say, oh, the electeds are going to fix it for us, or oh, this is going to fix it. Not one of these things will fix it for us. We have to do all of it. And, you know, I think we're all intelligent. We can do it. We can shoot them and walk and do all these things at the same time. But we have to think about the trainings, the skills, all the things we need to build this movement. And so I think some of our organizations are trying to do that. You can check out Bay Rising. We have a co-governance program where we're working with the electeds. CEP is actually a fiscal sponsor for organizations that want to do political work. C4, PAC, like all those different structures, not just about C3 organizing. You look at Causa Justa, if you want to look at the tenant organizing they're doing, and racial organizing. So many of our organizations have great examples. We can't share them all right now, but you know, there's a lot of great stuff happening. But we need more folks to join us. We need more folks to build, right? And so I think, you know, as we are leaving today, we hope that you will sign up, be a part of different things. Again, mentioning the Working Families Party as a political entity, that we need to build something outside of the Democrats. And then I'll just be last. Any last statements from our panel?
This is really amazing. I am not in spaces that are as progressive and friendly as this. At the last council meeting that Shaketa was at, there were like 100 protesters who were angry landlords and the original as soon as possible. So yeah, just get engaged, get organized, because yeah, you all are inspiring to me and help the other progressive electives, and we need that. It's hard work. Great. I'm in a little bit more famous spaces. I really appreciate it. And yeah, being all of it.
I think that what I'll say is that I think we're engaging. It's a battle where the forces, like the other side is not giving in. They're not giving in. And everything that we do creates opportunity for us to push back or for them to push out. I think we should keep that in mind. It's an active battle. It's not something that we can be passive about. And on so many fronts, like, it's sometimes you just have to go all out. I think this is like a moment in time where that is actually very true. And it's been true since, Trump kind of invigorated the voices of the right. That's not going away. It's even more.
Yeah, the backlash right now is because we've been so successful. So now we need to ramp it up again. But thank you everybody for joining us.
Close out the day after the 1:55. Kimi. Thanks for that.
You're